as anywhere, any part of the world, when you want to invest in property, there's a lot of aspects to consider. You know, your personal considerations, usage, business aspects, zoning. Obviously, there's an awful lot of villas. There's also an awful lot of demand, but how do you stand out in that competition with your branding? But I think the education and understanding of taxes on the actual business operation is very important to understand. And what I keep repeating and say, yes, we will see stricter enforcement, whether that is zoning, building permits, taxes all over, and that we already see. That started to happen.
Hello everyone, welcome back to our weekly Business Talk podcast. I'm Mari, one of the real estate agent at Seven Stones Indonesia. And today we are joining by Pak Terje Nilsen, our esteemed CEO. We will talk about the property valuation today. So Pak Terje, if you don't mind, for our viewers today, would you mind to share some of the key factors that drive property valuation?
Well, I think in this case, we want to talk specifically about Bali market. And I think that for as long as I've been in real estate in Bali, which is now 20 years, and prior to that too, I don't think I've ever seen prices going down in a significant way that we see in many markets. Perhaps a little bit during COVID, in the sense that some people were forced to sell, and the business obviously closed for a couple of years. But most people still managed to retain the asset and waited for it to sort of come back. I think what that shows is that Bali is a market that, to me, maybe except for a few places, is still very undervalued in terms of the returns that you can make, the price increasements that keeps coming. And again, compared to markets abroad, people come out of Hong Kong, Singapore, Europe, and other places. So the perception and the reality is that when people bring maybe $300,000, $400,000, maybe sometimes $1 million, what they get here for that amount of money is a lot more than what they would get of a similar property back home in their respective countries. I think, how do you evaluate a property? And I think today we're kind of talking more about market values, market needs, client needs, and so on. But obviously you have other mechanisms of opportunities and ways of looking at it. You can do what we call a bankable appraisal or market value, which is kind of, size of land, number of bedrooms, size of building, whether it's a lease or a freehold or HDB property. But I think what a lot of people, or sometimes also us as an agency, forget is to evolve a little bit with client. What are their values? Because it's very often more than just the value of the property. Maybe the buyer or a couple or a family or whatever it is, they have specific needs or wishes to what they see as important for them. Are they going to live here, proximity to school, and so on. But also, like, if it's a pure or fairly investment-driven, ROI-driven investment, then people tend to forget these things too. Like, who is going to come to this villa? What are the values they're going to see? What's the unique aspect of the property? Access, proximity to, let's say you're in Canggu, people like the beach clubs. How do you find a villa that may not be in the worst traffic these days? And so on and so on, while others may want more space, more nature, and so on. So I think there's a lot of components that needs to be considered when people buy a property.
I think in real estate world, all that we say, like a cliche, is always location, location, location. So in saying that, because you've been here for 20 years, so I'm sure you've seen how property value grows so differently across different areas. So could you share a little bit the critical role on how a location could determine the value of the property?
Yeah, I think, again, that also depends a lot on the long-term or medium-term plan for the investor, like what we've seen in the years. And even before we started in real estate, Kuta used to be the hotspot, Legan became the hotspot, Seminyak became the hotspot, Canggu became the hotspot. Maybe today Prerenan Sese is the hotspot together with Uluwatu and possibly also large parts of Ubud.
Yep.
And I think we thought also that after COVID that certain areas like maybe Legan and Kuta would struggle, but in their own way they have found their way back to the market, and villas, hotels, whatever it is, seem to work. That is probably also impacted by the growth that we see in both international tourism and also domestic tourism, and the fact that a lot of people actually want to live here. So there is a constant, I wouldn't say undersupply, but need for new stock and new rooms. But again, I think, the concept of the villa, like now everyone is trying to sell, 45, 50 square meters townhouses, $300 a night kind of dream, which I don't understand really what the market is going to be. If you're a, I don't know, digital nomad or someone who comes for a bit of fun, maybe you have a place to crash and that's it, and you don't use it that much. But if you're staying for a while, or if you're a tourist, you would want some more space. You would want a villa that or a place to stay that works for you, in the sense that you have a longer stay. Maybe you want to do some cooking. Does it have a good kitchen? Do you need to do some work? Does it have a little, office space? All these added values, I think, is tremendously important to always think through when people invest. And I guess the last part, or one of the other factors too, is to consider where a hotspot is now. What's the sort of ongoing supply, and what's the sort of projected demand for that area? Because you can easily today, and we know there's a lot of off-plan sales going on, you build a villa or you invest into a villa that is being built over the next 12 months, those demographics could change, and I think you need to evaluate that too. Will it continue like we look at Prerenan Sese, will it continue further up? What are the sort of mitigations and risk management that you can do and consider into that as well? Not just sort of blindly looking at a brochure, a good presentation. Like I had a conversation with another guy today who is doing a lot of marketing online and YouTube and so on, and said they actually have a high number of people who just buy based on presentation and nice videos. And to me, that is like quite impressive. Not saying that, that's a bad thing, but it's also a substantially high risk, I think, for the client, totally depending on the integrity of the agency or the project that they're looking at and buying into.
Yes, certainly. And talking about location, I think land zoning will also play a significant role, because that would also determine what the investor can and cannot do on that land. So would you mind to share with us a little bit about land zoning?
Yeah, I guess we have done a podcast specifically on that too, that people can look at what each zoning actually means and what you can do and not. But again, I think that is the confusion in the market, or somewhat overlooked aspect, that as long as it's a villa and in some shape or form they think they can do short-term rental, which seems to be what people want to get a good ROI. And I think, again, look at that. Look at, am I in a tourism zone, which obviously is viable for short-term renting, or what we call a mixed zone, which also you can do that. But if you're into a residential zone, then maybe yes, maybe no. For now, there seem to be sort of gray area agreements that people can work out, cooperating with the underlying freehold owner or management companies and so on. But forward, there is a substantial risk, if you ask me, that the government will be more strict on that. That if you want to do short-term rental, you need to be in a commercial tourism zone and not in a residential zone. And that is just common sense and how you see it in other countries. And then you have what I call farming land, or people will say green zone, not to be confused with green belts, but that also has an allowance for, commercial activities like villa operations and so on. But then people seem to very often forget that it should have a very low footprint. So like 20% of the land can be developed, which in many cases, a lot of people do not care about. And at some stage, further restrictions on that may come and then also impact your overall investment.
I've seen some area in Tabanan also has some plotted area for ecotourism. I think that plays a big part in like how the locals can utilize their land, farming land, into ecotourism.
Yeah, I think again the what we talk about is the green zone area, but non-rice field, because rice field I can see now from the incoming government too. They're very focused on rice field protection, not just in Bali but all over Indonesia, because it has to do with food protection and sustainability. But I think that's a market too that has a lot of potential. That you offer a lot of space. You offer what's the right word? Green views, trees. Much more nature, and that's possible to set up what we would then call a agrowisata, or a farming tourism, where you have an experience living in a area dedicated for farming, and you can obviously experience the daily life of farmers and an aspect around that. So in essence, the eco resort or the villas that you're building would be part of almost like a plantation in many ways.
Yeah. Okay. Earlier we brushed a little bit about the shift of demand. Like I've seen in the market how people are now shift over from traditional Balinese style into a more contemporary style of properties. So do you think like the design of the villas also play a part in property valuation?
Yeah, I think with that we know that the government actually has regulations on what a villa should look like from a exterior perspective. It should have some Balinese feel to it, ornaments and so on. It isn't a very substantial sort of punishment if you don't follow that, and you'll pay a one-time fine and you can continue. And I guess that's why people build different styles, sometimes very modern, sometimes minimalist, factory look, minimalist, what we would call a Scandinavian look type of villas. And Mediterranean, very much so. And I think a couple of earlier developers after COVID did really well with that sort of Mediterranean design. And the villa actually became like almost like an Instagram thing where they rented it out several times a day just to take pictures. And that seemed to have created a wave that everyone was doing Mediterranean for a while, and now you may have some oversupply. But again, I think when you are in Bali, you would have some touch of, I think, Balinese culture, at least some touch of nature, if you ask me. So like, for instance, we have a big space and emotions for eco resorts and eco development. So we comply very much then with what we would call a Balinese inspired style, even though back when I was a little bit younger than today, open living was a thing. But that is something that I think people after one rainy season gives up on. And if you have tourists coming in, they'll complain because sometimes the water and the rain is just too much. So I think a structure where you can actually seal off and put on your aircon and keep the mosquitoes out is needed.
Yes, mosquitoes, rainwater, and another thing is they wanted to keep out all the bugs and sometimes also tokek, what do you call it?
Yeah, I think
Gecko.
People, they're not used to what
tropical,
we call little lizards, but they're
lifestyle.
actually your best friends because they eat the mosquitoes and they keep the mosquitoes alive. So you shouldn't worry about them. They're not after eating you; they're after eating the mosquitoes, and they're really small. So we shouldn't worry too much about that.
So do you think villa owners could also have options to renovate their villas so that they have more value in the property before they sell?
Yeah, I think how you present is one aspect, and I think a lot of people forget in kind of what I call the branding of the villa. One is the design, how it looks, interior, and so on, but also the concept around it, and what we touched on before, that what is the villa providing, what area is it in, and what kind of clients are going to come in. Are you going to attract clients that are going to go on a lot of trips and they need easy access to roads out of the area, or is it clients that are into the party vibe of Canggu and they don't really go anywhere, they just move around from one beach club to the other, or whatever the concept is. So I think there's a lot to be said on that too, because obviously there's an awful lot of villas, there's also an awful lot of demand, but how do you stand out in that competition with your branding, and not necessarily always compete on price, but on context, content, what are you all about? Yeah,
I think it's more about the target market that you want to go for.
Yeah.
Okay. And moving on to the next segment, there are also external factors that drives property value. Like, let's say, other than property trends, maybe there are other factors that's constantly evolving, like the world, like interest rates from the Feds or Europe Bank.
Yeah, I think there's many, we can talk about, worldwide happenings, and we've seen it here in Bali. We've seen financial crisis, we've seen COVID, acts of terror, and so on. I think the only aspect that really had a detrimental impact was COVID. Indonesia and Bali seem to be not immune, but less exposed to financial impacts. And I think the repeating clients, the loyalty to Bali is very high. I also think we're coming into a bit of a tipping curve where the sort of massive Instagram, TikTok marketing, whatever, just creates an inflow of people that wants to go to Bali. But yeah, you should take into consideration that what is going on in the tourist market. If we go in and look at statistics today and sort of growth, it looks like we're just going one way, up and away. But that could change. Some people worry about traffic. Personally, I don't think that's a big issue, because it will change, but I don't think it's something that a tourist puts a detrimental sort of note that it was horrible in the traffic. I think it's other experiences that kind of is more dominant and make them happy anyway. But yeah, also geopolitically, I think Indonesia is now into a new government and are kind of saying we're geopolitically neutral. That I think is worth considering. And then you have also Indonesia's economy, who is also very strong and very set for further growth compared to other parts in the world, which automatically also pushes then more money into the local economy, which creates a larger middle class. Middle class, where do they go? They go domestic before they go abroad. So that in itself is a huge market as well, domestic market.
You mentioned a bit about infrastructure, like the traffic, and we know that Bali is planning railroad, right? The MRT. So I do think it will also play a key role in property value. It will drive it up even more once this rail is available.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, you have the LRT or MRT or whatever we want to call it. But other than that, you also have plans for toll roads, which I think will come. It's a bit confusing, I guess, on how they're going to sort of have the feeders up to that or out of that into areas like Canggu and so on. But one way or another, that will work. I think actually the train will be a big thing. And I think we can already see that becoming an argument. Where are the stop the stations basically for Legian, for Canggu, Tamagi, and so on, so that people will look at properties, look at developments close to those. And that's what we see in any big city like Jakarta today too, that you have a whole new market around the LRT development in Jakarta.
So previously we mentioned a little bit with the government change, Now that the new government came in, how do you see like these government policies such as taxes, incentive, or any regulatory influence property values?
Well, I think in general, the new government is going to continue the existing or the former policies of what we call the Jokowi government and his 10 years in power as the president. There's a few changes, I guess. There's a lot more ministries which seem to be set to speed up and break up, the different aspects. And I guess we'll need some time, and the government will need some time to figure out kind of who does what and where is the overlaps or not for that to happen. But I don't foresee any major changes. Indonesia is doing what I call normalizing. They're signing various different trade agreements and different ASEAN, Southeast Asia, and so on. So they just become more and more open and more easy to deal with. Tax policies, the government now seem to actually consider a lot more tax reductions and tax holidays. I guess it remains to be seen whether that happens or not, and will depend on whether they can grow the tax base to cover that, because that is obviously the major income for the government to do whatever future plans, infrastructure, and so on. I guess the thing that everyone talks about these days is the issue about a potential moratorium. And I think last week we saw a letter actually issued by the coordinating Ministry of Maritime and Investment Affairs. To me, I struggle to see whether that will materialize or not. And I think I've said many times that what we need is enforcement of existing regulations. We don't need a moratorium. I don't think it makes sense for many reasons. I don't think that the sort of what we call RT/RW or the zoning regulations and the plans that are set, they're already set for the foreseeable future, and if it grows quicker, then the government needs to deal with that and accept that. But I do agree that stronger enforcement, building permits, what you can build, zoning, and so on needs to come into place. But I struggle to see, for a few reasons, and I said this before the new government came in too, the structure that the government would use to put this together. And that letter came out, I think, on the October 18th. It was signed. Two days before the new government
came in.
And what a lot of people forget is that particular ministry no longer exists. There's not a new minister in that ministry. The whole ministry is gone. So then you get into who is going to pick that up. And what tend to happen, and is actually happen now, is that any significant policies, which this obviously is currently being revised or reviewed by the new Minister of Justice and coordinating Ministry of Justice, Yusril. So we'll see what happens. I think people also don't always understand that this is what, in legal terms, we would call an SK Menteri or a ministry instruction, or more like a instruction to do something about it and work it out. If you read the entire letter, it's not totally clear on what they see or not. But the actual moratorium is either a president or the governor. President, I doubt will do it. He's just, sworn in and probably want to keep a good momentum. Bali now in November will have governor elections. There's 2 candidates. I don't think any of those are for this. We now have an interim governor who is leaving his office in February or January, I think. And I doubt that he would, for the sake of 2 months, issue such a sensitive issue. What I keep repeating and say, yes, we will see stricter enforcement, whether that is zoning, building permits, taxes all over, and that we already see. That started to happen before the issue with moratorium came up. But again, I think it's important to further focus on what we talked about before. Are you in the right zoning for short-term rental? Are you in the right area for further growth? All of those aspects.
Okay. Next issue is about taxation. So we know how property value ties closely with tax, especially when investors are buying in. They need too aware of the taxes that they need to pay on this purchase. So could you elaborate a bit?
Sure. I think we have covered, and we will cover it in other podcasts, the sort of taxation of the transaction, whether you're buying a freehold or a lease. They're quite simple and straightforward.
Yeah.
But I think the education and understanding of taxes on the actual business operation is very important to understand. And one of the things I think the government there's already happening is the tightening of allowing expat as a private person to run a business, meaning they own a property in their private name and they commercialize it. Indonesia don't recognize that and don't allow that. So that I think is a thing that will be eliminated step by step. I don't think anyone again needs to panic, but should consider that. But then when you're in a company and you're renting out a villa, the first thing you comply with is what we call the tourist tax. It's kind of like a VAT. So let's say you rent your villa for $100, you need to add on the 11% taxes. That's paid. Then you obviously have a revenue who has costs. You have operational, you have utilities, maybe management fee to the management company. And a lot of management companies kind of stop at that level. But you need to take into consideration that then you get what we will call a GOP, or gross operational profit, that comes into the company, and the company then have corporate taxes that it needs to consider. And yeah, I think we talked and we'll talk more about that in other aspects or other podcasts. But once you're done with the corporate taxes, you then have a dividend that you can take out. And that will also have a tax implication, in the sense that if you're a tax resident to Indonesia, then that's 10%. If you take it abroad to your country of origin, depending a little bit on the tax treaty, that will normally be 15% final income tax on the dividend or ROI. That will be your actual ROI actually. So I think that sort of math, when you talk to clients, you'll talk them through that, so that the what's the right word, illusion of 20%, 17%, 25%. Sometimes I think I've seen up to more than 40% ROI is just not possible. But then realistic and much better ROI than in most other parts of the world, 8, 12, maybe up to 15%, I think is possible with a good concept.
Yes, okay. So on a leasehold, the taxes being paid is more straightforward, like you said. But when it comes to property, freehold property, what we know that buyers pay buyer's tax and sellers pay seller's tax, but also how do we make sure that the property valuation is accurate, so that the buyer and seller are paying the fair share of tax?
Well, I think like you say, the buying and selling of freehold, or what I call a registered lease, and people can go back and look like what that means. HGB or hakpakke on top of freehold. That has a 5% buyer, 2.5% seller tax on the transaction value. Lease is only 10% on the seller side.
On the sellers.
But what I'm trying to explain to a lot of people is that the lease structure to me is a very tax-heavy structure, because it was never meant to be for business. It was meant to be someone renting out, I don't know, an office like ours or a villa or something for a year or two. So that becomes tax-heavy, and why people, I think, slowly will shift towards what we call registered leases to ease up on that. And then we have the ongoing topic of downgrading value, which actually just hurts your own business, because if you do that, accepting that once you get into business, what you can actually depreciate or write off in your books forward is reduced with the amount that you actually reduce the transaction value. So to me, that doesn't make sense and need to end. Yeah.
Yeah. Sure. So for the freehold property, is there a way for the buyer to really ensure that the price that they paid is right on the market price? Like,
I guess then you need to find data, and that has been one of the biggest challenges for us in Bali, and I know you experience this every day when people say, "Oh, I'm gonna spend $500,000. Is it a good deal? And you go like, yeah, it's a good deal. And they say, well, can you show me? And you go like, yeah, well, you know. But I think now we see more and more data coming, you know, in terms of rental ROIs, AirDNA, REID, which is a local or expat setting up in Bali. They also talk a lot about, you know, build cost, market trends, turnover, 1, 2, 3, 4 bedroom areas on both lease and freehold. You can also go to a couple of different agencies and ask them to do what we would call a market appraisal, and they will come back with a view, and you can compare those and kind of find a middle ground. And you can go as far as doing an official appraisal or bankable appraisal, which will say what the bankable value is. That may or may not fit totally with what the market value is, but it gives you an indication of what the bank will be willing to lend to you. As a foreigner, that's still difficult, but it'll give you a perception of the value. Yeah.
I think we will find that bank valuation will be much more lower than what the market price is.
Most cases they are, simply because a bank is conservative and want to make sure they don't end up on the wrong side of a lending exercise. So I think, yeah, it's true. But a combination of that, you know, combined with ROI, potential earnings, AirDNA, and so on, you can make up your mind from a financial perspective whether this is a good investment or not.
I think that covers pretty much all. Is there something we missed?
I don't think we missed anything, but I think people will understand that as anywhere, any part of the world, when you want to invest in property, there's a lot of aspects to consider. You know, your personal considerations, usage, business aspects, zoning, neighbors, neighborhood, proximity to transportation, and so on. So I think that is an aspect that everyone watching this and every client should actually bring to the table. And when they talk to agents like you or other agencies, they need to have those conversations and get verified information and data around that.
Yep. I think we have explored all the complexities around property valuation today, from the basics all the way to the details. Thank you, Pak Terje, for your insights. And thank you guys for watching. Like and subscribe. And if you have more detailed questions, don't be hesitating to write us. See you on the next session.